Welcome to Mind, Body, Health, and Politics, Gary.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
I believe we're going to start by your playing some music for us today.
That's correct. This is called a handpan, and I'm just going to improvise a little bit.
Okay. For those who are listening but not watching this on YouTube, they can't see that interesting looking instrument. Tell us the name of it again and where it comes from, a little bit about it.
Okay, sure. It's called a handpan. It was created in 2001 by two Swiss metal artisans and musicians. They formed a company called Pan Art. And they had been making steel drums, which originate from Trinidad and Tobago, for many years. So they got used to hammering metal and tuning it, which is how you make a steel pan, right? And but they created this new acoustic world instrument that had the sound of essentially a pitched Indonesian gong. And then these tone fields, which are reminiscent of the steel pan, and then a really cool sound on the bottom, which mimics the sound of a ceramic-shaped vessel called a ghatam in South India, or an udu drum in Nigeria. And this is Daisy, my little puppy here, who's assisting me today. So this produces a very deep tone and also kind of a high zinging tone. So it's a very unique instrument, and Pan Art made this instrument till about, I think it was around 2013. They got very upset that other people were replicating their work. There was a worldwide demand for this instrument, and they could only produce about 200 by hand. Each handpan took, maybe a month to fully make. I mean, you start with flat steel, and then you have to put it into a form factor to create the shape, like a template, and then you have to fire it at a very high temperature for 1 or 2 days. And then you begin the hammering process. So it's a very labor-intensive process to make. And they stopped making it, and then they became very upset with other people who were making it. And so right now it's in court in Germany because there's probably now 50 decent makers around the world who have actually superseded their work but they didn't necessarily want to share, open source their design, so people did the best they could to replicate it. And so it's kind of a strange place to be at with such a harmonious instrument, but that's life.
So they created a new instrument and it caught on and it got copied.
It got copied, and they said, well, and they didn't, register some work as, part of their proprietary design. Yeah. And so it is what it is. But in the old days, meaning, after 2001, people had to write letters and basically kind of kneel and, supplicate in order to get one. So I think there was a lot of animosity created too.
It really caught on.
I discovered this instrument in 2004. I went to a arts and business conference because I also bring music into organizations for leadership, team development, and helping people to understand how to navigate change through music. So I attended a arts and business conference at the Castle Borel in Croatia. It's a 13th century medieval castle. And as I was walking into the courtyard, I heard the sound, a heavenly sound. And I walk in, and there were 3 European musicians playing the handpan together. And I thought, oh my God, beam me up. I'd never heard a sound like this. And the next summer, I went to study vocal improvisation with Bobby McFerrin at the Omega Institute in upstate New York. And there were like 20 of these out on the lawn. The North American distributor at the time was there. And so I ordered 3 handpans. And that was the beginning of my journey with the handpan.
Tell me, Gary, why music to begin with? To give us some information about the history of music.
Wow. Well, there are different theories by musicologists and ethnomusicologists and evolutionary biologists. But let's just say that music was one of our earliest forms of communication and of bringing tribes together, bringing people together to create a sense of commonality, to also appease the gods, to, provide for a beneficial hunt or harvest. I mean, music is, it's referred to as a universal language. And as I've traveled the world, there's various aspects of music. There's rhythm, there's melody, there's harmony. And in the West, we've mostly focused on harmony, in part because of, the church, and also you have people like Bach. So we created these stacks of harmonies. And in other countries, like Africa, they've focused more on rhythm. In India, more melody and rhythm, not so much harmony. And so I studied with a teacher that really looked at what he called rhythmic archetypes. So this is kind of an adaptation of Carl Jung's notion of a collective unconscious and of archetypal energies or forms. And his premise, and I agree with him, is that there are rhythmic archetypes that are drawn from nature, oftentimes in rhythms of 2 and 3 in different combinations. If you are resting and sleeping and breathing, you're breathing generally in a rhythm of 3 because there's a pause. But if you're exercising and very activated, you're breathing in a rhythm of 2. So you can look at all of nature as a form of both pulsation and flow. So an example of pulsation would be when you hear insects, and there's this like pulsation because they're kind of in training through their sound. They're communicating, they're in training. But if you look at the movement of clouds, that's a different kind of movement and rhythm, which I would call flow. So you have pulsation and flow as two primal energies in the world with creation. And pulsation kind of introduces it's almost like, I wanted to say history begins. There's like a timeline. It's in time. And when you're in flow, whether it's a flow state or musical flow, there doesn't have to be a set rhythm. So it's kind of like if you know something about art or painting, you could have representational art, and then you can have abstract expressionism, which is more about feeling and tone and texture. And so that's sometimes a helpful orientation for people to listen to music. Because, for example, if you listen to late John Coltrane or certain people that might be more challenging to listen to, I know for me it was kind of an epiphany when I stopped having it had to be representational reality I was listening to. I was more listening to emotion and tone and getting into the flow of music.
Give us some definitions and an explanation of harmony, melody, and rhythm.
Okay. Well, harmony is, you can think of harmony as, again, we get back to the physics of sound, really. So if you take a vibrating column of air, like in a flute, or you take a string and you subdivide the string, find the center point, that's going to now produce a fifth on the scale. So if there are 8 notes on the scale, there are different ways of subdividing scales, depending on what culture you're from. But in the West, we think of octave, 8 steps, and then we think of the fifth, because the fifth, again, just in terms of pure science of sound. And then if you take those and you subdivide them again, I'm pretty sure you get the fourth. So basically, the different steps, or sometimes they're also referred to as overtones. And we could talk for several hours about the overtone series. Because again, when you look at music as physics and mathematics, and the Fibonacci series, which is mapped like a spiral, there's a correspondence between music and tone and the mathematics of that, and how, again, how nature manifests itself in the material world. There's certain patterns. But I'll give you an example. So if this is the root tone, this is a C sharp. So that's an octave relationship.
Okay, so an octave is 8 notes: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Correct.
And how does the fifth, where you refer to...
This is actually the fifth. 1, 5. So this is a very harmonious sound together. And again, because you're subdividing that range directly in the middle. So that's the next harmonious step. If you go to something like this, so that's a much more tense harmony. So sometimes we refer to that as a close harmony. If you listen to like the Bulgarian women's choir, a lot of those harmonies are very dense and rich, and we sometimes refer to them as dissonant harmonies because there's not as close of a symmetrical relationship.
And then now elaborate then on melody.
So melody is the melodic unfolding is it's a song. There's something being sung through the melody, and oftentimes the harmony supports that. So I like to think of the melody as the direction of the piece. It's the story, it's the narrative.
So is the melody more like the lyrics and the harmony more like the music?
No, I wouldn't say that. So the melody is the storyline, and that could be through lyrics. It could be through simply, like if it's an instrumental piece, it won't have lyrics. The lyrics and the melody are two different aspects to the story. And you'll notice that sometimes in some music, there's a dichotomy or tension between the lyrics of being sung. It might be happy lyrics, but it might be a minor scale and melody. And so sometimes that divergence is also part of the story. You could say it's an ironic split between, let's say, what the ego is saying and what the underlying music is. Sometimes they really join together. Mm-hmm. And then rhythm is, I would say rhythm is primal pulsation. So when you look at rhythm, there's the cycle, meaning like we're used to 4-beat cycles, rock and roll. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can kind of hear that cycle. And then there's also waltz time. There's a 3-beat cycle. So 4-beat rhythms generally are more extroverted. They induce movement. So if you're listening, if you want to work out, you're probably going to be listening to something in 4/4 time.
Okay, give us a demonstration of 4/4 time.
I just did.
Do it again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it has the feeling of walking or running if I speed up the tempo. Mm-hmm. It's external energy. If I move to a 3 time, yes, it's more like an internal spiral or vortex. You can hear it and feel the difference. So that's more of a kind of internal spiral, and it's oftentimes used for trance. So if a different culture wants to create a collective healing ritual through movement, sound, and music, oftentimes it will be in a rhythm of 3 or 6, or in a polyrhythm of 3/4, 4/3, 6/4. You'll hear this a lot in African music.
Well, do that for us, Gary. Call out, I'm doing 3 and do 3, then call out 4 and do 4, and then call out 6 and do 6.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's start with 3. Yeah. 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now 6. So the difference between 3 and 6, in part, now we get into a little bit with how the melody shapes the rhythm. If I want to have something in 3, I might create a melody that repeats and gives you a sense of 3. If I want a longer melody, I may do 2 of those units, and then you're basically creating something in 6. An example would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6s you can also feel as a slow 3 or as a 6, or you can double time that to a 12. So again, rhythm scales. If you have a very fast rhythm, you can feel the slower subset of that. Like if you have a very fast 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's really about the cycle and then your ability to subdivide time. And that's really where the magic is. It's in the subdivisions, because the subdivisions give each cycle a different emotional feeling. So one way to illustrate this is if you're stepping 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, so that's the cycle. It's a 2-beat cycle. But you can fill that interval with any subdivided time. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm not changing this cycle of 2, but I'm making the subdivisions more and more dense. And that gives the rhythm a very different feeling.
Can you demonstrate that to us on the drum?
Yeah. Let me see here.
And call out what it is you're doing, so we.
1, 2, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and 2, and 1, and 2, and so I just subdivided that space into 2 equal parts, which gives me a feeling of an upbeat. Up, 1, 2, 1, and 1, and 2, and very different between just the pure 2-beat cycle by adding the upbeat, the halfway point. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1. Now we move to 3. Gamma, gamala, gamala, gamala. 1, 2, 3. I'm having trouble doing this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You notice that I haven't changed the cycle. All I'm changing is how I'm subdividing that time. Now let's move to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can move to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. Move to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you get the idea.
I get the idea, but it sounds the same.
Well, the cycle sounds the same, but then
Yes.
how I'm subdividing the time is where the magic is.
And what's taking place in the subdivisions? Are we hearing something else?
You're hearing that. So think of it this way. If you're driving across a bridge, you have pillars on the bridge holding the bridge up, right? And they're usually equidistant from one another because that's the most stable structure.
Yes.
Again, I want you to think of rhythm in music as we're now in the world of time, the world of pulsation. And so there are structures that create stability. So let's take these two pillars holding up a bridge. So that space never changes. But visually, you could imagine creating two equidistant places. So that halfway point in that span would now be a 2-beat subdivision.
Okay.
In open space, you've now created this imaginary other halfway point.
Right.
Which feels like an upbeat, which is very different. When you listen to reggae music as opposed to rock and roll, you hear boo-doo, da-da, ba-da-da. Those are two upbeats. It creates a very different feeling and motion than the downbeats.
And play the difference between the rock and roll and the
And by the way, your phone is in a rhythm of 6. Your ring.
Thank you. So you now have a 2-beat subdivision. You can imagine now subdividing into 3 equal segments that span, and now you have a 3-beat subdivision, or putting in 3 pillars in that space. So now you have 4 equal segments. Now you have a 4-beat subdivision. So it's basically feeling the time, playing with time, cutting it up differently, slicing it up. And when you hear a good jazz drummer, oftentimes you might be hearing a 4-beat cycle, but the way they're feeling the time internally, yes,
in their body, viscerally, and what they're starting to do on the cymbal and the snare in terms of subdivision, accents, syncopation, is they're feeling the subdivision that span of 4 beats in a rhythm of 3. So basically, and that's what gives it its juiciness. It's kind of like standing with a foot in the world of 4, which you could say is concrete reality in a way, and the world of 3, which is like trance. And that really, that juxtaposition is really what came when Africa met Europe in the slave trade. In other words, that notion of polyrhythms really comes from Africa. And it's at the heart of rock and roll. Without Africa, we would not have rock and roll. Now, there are also some European song forms that blended with that, and you find that in samba music in Brazil, you find that in rumba in Cuba, but there are all of these cross sections of Africa and Europe.
Fascinating. What got you started in exploring the world of sound, music, and rhythm, Gary?
Well, this is my myth of origin. There's something very powerful that happened to me as a 5-year-old. And I'll just say, as a little bit of background, my parents survived the Holocaust in hiding. And most of my family was wiped out in Poland during the war. But they survived with my grandmother. They came to the U.S. They rebuilt their lives. And so one might imagine it was a pretty intense, tense, emotional environment to grow up in as a young kid. And I was pretty shy and kind of a loner. and somewhat withdrawn. And then there's that beautiful poem by Pablo Neruda, where he says, poetry found me. And that's such a beautiful articulation of the power of something primal that finds you. It's not like you go out chasing it. And that's what happened to me when I was 5 years old in kindergarten. I was part of a musical assembly. So there were 500 kids sitting cross-legged, chirping on the floor, really excited. And we got out of class, and the principal, a ruddy-faced gentleman by the name of Mr. Travis, spoke into the microphone. He said, kids, now you're going to experience something you'll never forget. And that was not hyperbole to me. It actually was true. Next thing I noticed, these beautiful plush purple curtains parted, and a tall African-American man came out on stage and started improvising on 4 conga drums. And this was my introduction to Afro-Cuban music. And as if that was not enough excitement activation, I don't know who thought of turning on strobe lights so they were stopping down his actions in time. So this was like a psychedelic experience. Uh-huh. And I got up. I was literally entranced, and in trance, I got up and started dancing in front of the whole school. I had no awareness of my ego or anything. And Richard, what do you think the kids first did? What do you imagine their reaction was?
Hooting and hollering or jeering?
Jeering. They were making fun of me. They were laughing. Yeah. But then something really important happened. Someone else got up and joined me.
Oh.
Okay. And then more people started to join us. And all of a sudden, within like 5 minutes, all 500 people were on their feet dancing, school board members, teachers, the principal. I mean, it was like this wave of change that overtook the system. So this was my first introduction to systems change.
At age 5.
At age 5. And I heard a voice in my head that said, I want to do this someday. And I had no clue what that even meant or was. But I remember that distinctly. And then after that, I was changed. Something about music activated a part of my spirit or soul. And then I started like beating on everything, including my brothers, and other students, but pots and pans and desktops. And, I made a lot of teachers very mad at me, but it was my way of expressing myself. And then I started to explore drums early on. At first, I played the mahogany chair in my brother's room, 2 Santana albums. I learned all the conga parts. And after a year, my father finally said to my mom, hey, why don't we get him some drums? He's wearing that chair out. He's serious about it. So I kid with people and say I was the first chair of my own orchestra for a year. And my dad took me to a music store. And I don't know how I knew I wanted these bongos. Of course, they were the most expensive bongos in the store. I think they were like $120 back then. They were made by Gone Bops, and they were the most beautiful sounding drums. And so I started to really get into listening to Santana, and then Afro-Cuban music, and then Brazilian music through Airto, one of the great innovators of world percussion. And then I started to form different bands. And then that eventually led me to my life's work of using rhythm as a tool to bring people together.
And so, somewhere along the line, you started a long-term love affair with Brazil. Tell us about that.
Well, there's something, the 3 musics I found most compelling have been, well, African-based music, mostly through the mbira from Zimbabwe, but also West African drumming, djembe, which you find in Guinea, Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria, and then Indian classical music, raga, North Indian, South Indian music, where there's incredible rhythmic development and melodic development. And it's very spiritual music. I mean, we will hopefully have a program about Indian music. But Brazil is where I found my greatest love and musical home, in part because in Brazil you have incredible melodies. Think of Jobim. You have these incredible bossa nova, samba melodies. And then you also have incredible rhythm that was informed by African music and the African slaves in Brazil. And then you also have incredible harmony that was brought to Brazil through the guitar, the 7-string guitar, which is thought to have originated in Russia.
Really?
Yeah. Brazil has been a melting pot for many different cultures all over Africa, all over Europe, of course, with the colonial connection through Portugal. And through Portugal itself, the connection with the Moors and with North Africa. So in Brazil, every region has like 5 of its own unique rhythms. Let me put it this way. When Paul Simon's guitarist of many years was asked, I was backstage at Paul Simon's last concert in Brooklyn, probably about 5 years ago. And I know his percussionist, Jamie Haddad, incredible percussionist. And so I was backstage hanging out with the band, and the lead guitarist, I don't know how we started to talk about Brazilian music, but he said, if aliens ever land on Earth and ask, where's the best music? Where should I go to hear Earth's greatest music? He said, I just send them to Brazil. And I kind of feel that way. And it's not that any other music is less, but there's something about my soul that really resonated with the Brazilian expression. And there's a word in Portuguese called saudade. And saudade is yearning. It's a deep longing in the soul. And in Brazilian music, you hear that as both the sweetness and the sadness of life, commingled. And you also hear it in Irish music, and you hear it in Jewish Eastern European music too. That same kind of commingling of the sweetness and the sadness of life. In 1989, I got a grant to study music in the Amazon. I was living in St. Louis at the time, in the state of Missouri, and Missouri, through the Partners of the Americas, was paired with the northernmost state of Pará in the Amazon. And so that's where I went, and I studied folkloric and popular music at a classical music conservatory. I had an incredible teacher. It was an incredible initiation. And my first night in Brazil, talk about grace, I met like the quintessential samba singer in Brazil. His name is Martinho da Vila. He's still alive today. His daughter, Martinalia, is a very famous soulful roots samba singer in Brazil, tours all over the world. And I went to a club to hear them perform. And at the break, I went up to them and I talked to them in my really horrible Portuguese at the time. Told them how much I love their music, how I'd been listening to them for years. And I gave Martinalia one of my little egg shakers. And she immediately fell in love with me and started using it on stage. And they basically, so Marcin Davila's percussionist, Ovidio Brito, became my first percussion teacher in Brazil. And I started studying with him. I got to be friends with their family. And they invited me to come back for Carnival in Rio. You know, like 1 million people or more in the streets, all dressed up in costumes.
Uh-huh.
And so I didn't have the money for a plane ticket, though. But they said, your costume will be ready. We'll fit you now. Your costume will be ready. Come back in February.
Uh-huh.
So I wrote to a Brazilian airline, and I said, you know, I bring samba into organizations for leadership and team building. Would you guys contemplate trading with me for a round-trip ticket to Rio in exchange for a workshop for some of your employees? Pretty ballsy.
Creative.
Thank you. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the VP of marketing. And he said, we love your idea, but could you play at a promotional event, travel event, instead of doing a workshop? And I said, of course. And so that's what I did. So I got my ticket. I went to Rio. And that changed my life. I basically came back. I started a samba school in St. Louis based on what I experienced in Rio. And I started bringing a program called Synergy Through Samba into corporate America. Now you have to realize this was in 1987. So when I first approached a corporate exec about this idea, I still remember his name, Jerry Adams. He was VP of product development at a company. I said, you know, what if we do this because rhythm and music has a primal aspect of cohesion, togetherness, community. That might be something that could benefit your employees or some of your client teams. What do you think? He said, it's a wacko idea, man. It's never going to work. He said, but let me send you to this guy named Don Furman who works in our communications department. He's a very creative guy. No one quite understands what he does, but maybe he'll understand what you're talking about. So I meet with this guy named Don Furman. I pitched the idea to him and he goes, what a great idea. Let's do it. He said, we're not going to pay you anything, but if it goes well, we're going to videotape it. We'll give you a letter of recommendation and we might hire you and give you a budget to create some of these programs for our clients. I had nothing to lose. I did it. It got voted the top employee development workshop they had ever done. Not only did I get 10s on like impact, I actually got 11s and 12s. They, you know, a lot of people like this just like blew it off the map. So I knew I was onto something. I knew that when I started working with kids, I was bringing rhythm into inner city schools for building esteem and collaboration with inner city kids. I was then doing the same workshops in white suburban schools and bringing those two cohorts together for joint performances. I brought Olatunji, Babatunde Olatunji, brought African music to the U.S. in 1956. He set up a center for African music and culture in Harlem. He was a close personal friend of Dr. Martin Luther King's and John Coltrane. And I met Baba in 1985 at SOB's in New York, Sounds of Brazil, not Sons of Bitches, but Sounds of Brazil. And Baba invited me to study with him. And so I saw the impact of rhythm on what he used to do with thousands of people. Oftentimes, Mickey Hart, one of his students, would invite him and his troupe to open for the Dead, in these big coliseums and outdoor concerts. And Baba's, African music just helped people go into trance. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are drawn to rock and roll and to getting together as an audience, which we've lost in the last 3 years during COVID, is the ability to come together. I think that music and dance and storytelling are all elements of ritual and worship that are really basic and important to human beings.
You've talked in some of your writings about bringing musical thinking into the world and into corporations. What tell us about what you mean by musical thinking?
Okay, well, music can function as a metaphor. We all get that, right? I don't want to play second fiddle to you. You struck a chord with me. I'm going to chime in. You're singing to the choir. All of these expressions that give voice to music as a powerful metaphor. We're not playing on the same page. We're not in sync. All these ways that we use music to convey something that is a form of bone knowledge. It's very old knowledge to the human condition. The power of a metaphor is that it cuts through the complexity and duplicity of language. It allows the mind to have a unifying paradigm, model, picture, actually, that allows us to understand and unpack something. It's like an acorn seed, the metaphor. So if we say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, we use that terminology. It's the same kind of idea. A metaphor is a picture. And music or a rhythm is maybe the equivalent of 10,000 words. And so I use music as a metaphor to help people understand how to line, how to synchronize, how to listen. And I would say those are all forms of thinking. So Howard Gardner came out with a seminal book called Frames of Mind, where he laid out his, theory that there are multiple forms of intelligence. And we tend to mostly respect the linear, the mathematical forms in our culture. But he also said there's kinesthetic intelligence. There's musical intelligence. There's different kinds of intelligence. When you see an athlete perform or a great dancer, it's like, wow, that is intelligence. Or a great musician or someone that can improvise. And so what does it mean to think musically? It means to think, I'll give you some examples. So let's say, and you're trained as a psychologist in clinical psychology, right?
Yes.
So in therapy, in a therapeutic process, the concept of resonance is very important, isn't it?
Yes.
What is resonance?
Matching, a matching of vibrations.
Beautifully said. It's exactly that. It's a matching, a mirroring of vibration. It's almost like a dance of energy. And that happens in the brain and the nervous system. It's kind of like whole body listening or attunement.
Yes.
And that's what happens with musicians. Our nervous systems are really like we have sympathetic strings. If you're playing the cello and there are other instruments in the room, at certain frequencies, they begin to vibrate. And so if we look at our brains and our nervous systems as musical instruments, so below a patient's or client's words, you have the energy, you have the tone that you're listening for.
Yes.
You're listening for the empty spaces and what's not said.
Yes.
This is musical intelligence. There's a beautiful piece, and I'm sorry we don't have it queued up to play for people, but I invite the listeners to listen to an incredible piece of music that Bill Evans did. It's called Peace, Peace. Peace, Piece. Peace, Peace. And it was the precursor to a very famous track that appeared on Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, one of the most famous jazz albums of all time, called Blue and Green. Or is it Green and Blue? I think it's Blue and Green. But if you listen to Peace, Peace, you'll hear that Bill Evans starts this beautiful ostinato pattern in the bass with his left hand. Ostinato simply means it's repetitive and ongoing. So whenever you start a rhythm that is somewhat flexible but repetitive, like what the developing child hears in the mother's womb as an ongoing rhythm and heartbeat, it produces a sensation of calm and entrainment because it becomes a secure holding environment. A steady groove becomes a way for the listeners to entrain, almost like they were back in the womb, and relax. And then with Bill's right hand, he begins to layer on top more and more distress, challenges, discord, offbeat rhythms, syncopation. And both of these things, both of these realities are happening simultaneously. So this is a form of musicality. You can think of it as rhythm and counterpoint, like your rhythm and how you interface with a client when you're silent and listening and receptive, when you interject. That dance, that co-creation is very musical. So when I talk about musical thinking, what I'm getting at is which layer are we going to tune to and respond to? For the example I gave you in Bill, if a person, a client, or a client system is distressed, and let's say is in survival mode rather than sustaining or thriving mode, if they're in survival and distress mode, is there a way to create a story, a metaphor, an experience that helps them to ground and bring in another reality? So whenever I'm working with a client in a coaching relationship or as an organizational change practitioner, I'm always looking at what's the current reality, what are the voices in the system, what's the vibe, what kind of music are they making? Is it a funeral dirge? Is it a polka? And then what are their aspirations? And how do we bring to light that creative tension between the current reality and the aspiration and the dream? And how do we resolve that? So in music, one of the key concepts is tension and release. That's what makes music magical. And the brain wants both comfort, security, predictability, and novelty. We want our cake and we want to eat it too. And in relationships, it's the same thing. We're navigating the continuum between autonomy, sovereignty, and self-expression, between security and autonomy. that dynamic polarity. That's music. So it's because of the different trainings I've had, both in human dynamics as well as in music, I look at the world and make sense of the world in musical terms. And that really helps me to understand what's central to what's going on right now and what's peripheral. What am I noticing with my nervous system? And how do I give voice to those different tensions so that it can create some resolution, either internally or through a conversation or through the therapeutic work that I do with clients and systems.
You've mentioned working with systems and with organizations. Could you give us an example of your bringing and using music in a corporate structure in order to either decrease stress or increase cohesion and teamwork?
Yeah. Okay. So I've been doing that for a long time. And see, I believe that rhythm is an incredible diagnostic tool for team dynamics. And I'll tell you why I think that way. Have you ever had acupuncture?
Yes, I have.
How does the acupuncturist diagnose what's going on with you internally as a system? What do they do?
They feel the channels of energy in my body, meridians.
The meridians, channels of energy, and where do they access that information?
By touching various parts of my body and feeling the energy moving, is what they say.
Okay. And part of the gateway to that is the pulse.
Yes.
So there's something called pulse diagnosis. So in the West, if we feel pulse, we're mostly looking for pulse rate, heart rate.
Yes.
That's just one data point. So in the Chinese system, and this also got replicated in Korea and in Japan, is you're using 3 different points on each wrist and at 3 different levels. So what you're trying to listen to or feel, as if I were playing a cello or string instrument, is I'm feeling amplitude, I'm feeling quality, and I'm peering or listening into the discrete different organ systems and whether there's a lot of harmony or dissonance, whether there's excess or deficiency. So you have 18 different data points. That's a lot more information.
Yes.
You're also looking at the tongue. You're looking at the person's face. Exactly. Sometimes you're palpating their body. So when I get a team or a group of people and introduce a pulse and ask them to hold a pulse, I can tell, are they dragging the rhythm? Deficiency. Are they accelerating tempo? Excitement, perhaps? Anxiety? Both dragging tempo and rushing tempo oftentimes is an unconscious way of not being present, because there's only one point of being in time. And when you open up yourself to entrain, because it feels really bad if you're aware of the pulsation of the group and you're out of time and you're aware of that, it does not feel good. If you're out of the groove, it's very awkward. So you either have to numb that out or you consciously decide. I remember being in a yoga class and someone decided to just do free form dance. You know, there's a certain rhythm to collectives, and if you surrender to that, it can be an extraordinary experience. So I use rhythm as a pulse diagnosis with teams. How quickly do they entrain? Do they resist entrainment? Do they speed up? Do they slow down? Do they check out? Because once I start coaching them verbally, through body language, and they become more and more coherent, there's a certain threshold and tipping point. And this is what I experienced as a 5-year-old in that assembly. There is a tipping point, a threshold that gets triggered where something greater is tapped into. A collective intelligence that I'll call rhythm, or some primal energy that creates more and more field coherence. Once people experience that, going from individual, I'm going to do this on my own, I don't care if I'm in sync with anyone else, this is my life, to like, oh, okay, I'm starting to play with my section, my team, and then, oh my God, we're forming an orchestra, and now I can listen to myself, and I can listen to these diverse voices and not lose my place. That's an incredibly rich metaphor and experience of, again, field coherence, team harmony, organizational resilience. And so once they've had that experience, their conversations about what's in the way of achieving that at work transforms. Because instead of an abstract concept, we have had an incredible experience of navigating from individual, which is very much our culture, to collective without losing a sense of individual voices. And I'd say that's the great challenge of our age and of this culture in the U.S.
Now, Gary, you talk in your work about using music as medicine. Now, do you mean that metaphorically, or you mean that literally? How do you use music as medicine?
Great question. Well, music can be used in a lot of different ways. First of all, music is the most powerful food for the brain. And the reason I say that is, they've done high-res MRI scans of the brain. Some of this work was done by I am spacing out his name. He's at UCSF, and he's a friend and colleague. But basically, his name will come to me. He did a beautiful TEDx talk called This Is Your Brain on Improv. So maybe one of our co-producers could Google that and find his name for the listeners. But music, and so playing music, so listening to music is the next best thing to actually playing music. But I want to encourage your listeners to play music. It could be something like the handpan, which is in a pentatonic scale, which means you can't really play a wrong note. So you don't have to understand music theory. You just pretend you're a 5-year-old kid and you're not worried about making a mistake, and then you create music. Or you could play a kalimba. Again, it's a pentatonic scale. So playing music is going to be the most powerful way to excite many different regions of the brain, particularly the communication between the left and right hemispheres over the corpus callosum, the part of the bridge of the brain that unites both hemispheres. So music is medicine in that it helps you to create more neural connections. So in the last 20 years, we've learned a lot about neuroplasticity. That's why as we age, it's good to try new things, to learn new languages, to travel to distant lands, to take up a new instrument. So all of these things help to keep the brain young and in shape. So music is medicine in that way. There's another aspect where music helps people attune to their emotions. You know, we can use music to, if I need to write, I'm going to put on a certain type of music. Probably not with English lyrics. It'll probably be instrumental music. It might be a foreign language, which my brain processes in a more right brain way than language oftentimes starts to activate the linear brain, and then we're trying to figure out what the lyrics mean. And that takes us away from the right brain creation flow state that we might want to be in. So there's a way that music can also, if you're grieving, you might intentionally put on sad music because it might help you amplify and really feel your feelings, tension and release. When we can grieve well, when we can cry, when we can feel those feelings, we can release them. We can move, ride the wave and move to the next emotion. So in that way, as emotional balm, music can be very, very therapeutic and medicinal.
It almost sounds like food.
Exactly. But if I want to work out, I'm going to put something that's, a certain number of beats per minute, and it's probably going to be in 4/4, and it's going to impel me to move and entrain with more rapid breathing, fast walking, or running. Again, so music is incredible in that way, in that it can facilitate an inner journey. Since I know that you're you're one of the world experts on psychedelic medicine, the concept of the playlist in a psychedelic journey, plant medicine journey or MDMA or what have you, is super important, as well as the intention. The music in many ways guides the journey. So you don't have to be taking, an external agent to produce that inner state. Music alone can help you shift moods and navigate that.
One time, many decades ago, I was given LSD by a famous psychologist who provided such, and he blindfolded me during the experience and played Beethoven.
Wow.
And it was an amazing experience because the music just literally took over my entire being, and then I found myself awed by what it took to produce such such music, and to create such a thing. It was quite an experience. I have read that Mozart is a preferred music for playing to babies who are still inside their mothers, and also to neonates. Is there anything new that you can share with us on that for those who have young children?
Sure. By the way, the name of the guy who did the TEDx talk, This Is Your Brain on Improv, his name is Charles Limb. Limb. He's at UCSF.
Charles Limb. Oh, I thought it was David Levin. Charles Limb. Okay.
Charles Limb. Yeah, David Levitin wrote a book called This Is Your Brain on Music. And he's a former music producer, musician, and neuroscientist. Uh-huh. And that's also an interesting book. But yeah, I think it's fun to experiment. And if you have a baby, first of all, don't wait for the baby to be born. When the baby is in utero, expose it to different music. Dance to certain music. If you play an instrument, having the instrument close to your body, which I guess you'd have to if you're playing an instrument, whether it's guitar or flute or piano, those vibrations are extremely healing. And you're helping the baby to become more musically intelligent before it even gets in the external world. But there has been a fair amount of research on Mozart, on Bach, again, because Bach's the fugues are so orderly. They're both like structured, but they open up like a flower. There's something so magical about Bach. And, but African music, that incredible sense of rhythm. And then if you dance to it while your baby's in your belly and, inside, that's an incredible healing thing. Lullabies, there have been some studies of the similarity of lullabies cross-culturally. And I can't recite verbatim the findings, but I know that there are some things around the pitches that seem to, like the intervals of lullaby melodies that are cross-cultural. And some of them are in 4, and some of them are more soothing and in 3 or 6. Do-do-do, 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 do-do-do. 1, 2, 3. So, yeah, I'd say have fun and experiment. I've actually played the handpan for a number of women like a week before they gave birth. It's one of the things I love to do is have women create circles of some of their closest friends and then play the handpan, do a handpan meditation, which, the vibration of the handpan is so penetrating. And, I've done some work with Jack Kornfield where I've accompanied him oftentimes before he leads a meditation or Dharma talk at Spirit Rock. And for many people, it's like an instant meditation.
Gary, during the interview, you've mentioned something called a playlist. And I'd like you to talk to us about creating a playlist to facilitate different emotional, mental states, such as activating, thinking, writing, calming. Is there different music for different states? And how do we create these playlists?
Well, yeah, the playlists are very individual. People, resonate to different kinds of music. There are certain things, when I hear certain songs, they put me in a different state. There are certain songs that produce a feeling of tenderness, where all of a sudden I'm more able to access certain emotions. So, if you want to have a whole playlist around calming, if that's the impact that you want to achieve, and you're on, some streaming platform that allows you to create a folder or playlist, you can do that. Or if you're still downloading tracks and you're creating it on your computer as a player and then syncing up your smartphone to it so you can listen in your earbuds when you're out walking. I mean, one of the most healing things for me in the morning is taking a walk, listening to great music, which inspires me, and walking my dog. I mean, that for me, like for 20 minutes and then looking at nature is just an incredible experience. It's, it's a form of my daily centering. Plus, as a musician and composer, I get so fired up. It's like, oh God, I want to create something like that. I want that feeling in my next piece. So it gives me all these, or it might get ideas around something else for my business or work or my life. So I'd say being able to listen to music at times away from your computer. So listening to music when you're not in your normal linear work mode. I mean, you could certainly listen to music as a backdrop to writing a proposal or writing a blog, and that's fine, that's great. It's like keeping you company. But getting away, and it's funny, I'm saying getting away from technology, and of course we're using technology to listen to the music, but I mean getting away from your screen. And like, I have an incredible sound system and vinyl, record system, and I try and listen to a little bit of vinyl every day or a CD where I'm actually sitting on the couch and not doing anything else. It's a way that we used to listen to music that has been mostly lost. And I'm not judging the other ways of listening to music. I'm suggesting that if you're going to create a playlist, that you listen to it in different ways. So lying down on the floor or the bed is going to produce a certain impact where you're fully receptive. Listening sitting up, listening when you're out walking or exercising, all of these are going to help you in a medicinal way. They will all have a different impact on your nervous system and on your inner state. And one thing I've learned is one of the most important things we can do. There's so little we have control over, really. If maybe 5 or 10% of consciousness is conscious internally and the rest is unconscious, that's not a lot. And then so that's the microcosm. If we move to the macrocosm, scientists and astronomers are telling us, 90 to 95% of matter is dark. We can measure the gravitational field, but we can't really see it. So whether you go to the microcosm or the macrocosm, there's, not a lot that we're in control of. But one thing we can influence is our internal state, our state of mind, our state of being. And when we're in a more proactive, creative, resource state, different thoughts are possible that are not possible when we're under stress or in a survival mode. All of that extra RAM power gets eaten up just trying to keep it together. Mm-hmm. So music can be used as an incredible way to shift state.
We're about out of time. I'd like you to please tell our listeners how they can find you and how they can find information about you.
Thank you. It's been really a pleasure to kind of do a tour of how much I love music, how much I've discovered, what a rich, deep ocean it is when you get into the physics of sound, how it connects to nature, the different cultural forms of music. It's more than a lifetime of understanding and work. People can find my music side. I just came out with a CD called Roots and Wings, Medicine Music. And it's really intended for everything we've been talking about. It won the top global music award in last year. I'm very proud of that. 24 master musicians from 8 countries, inspired by Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road project. Entering it into the Grammys. We'll see whether I get nominated or not. But so people can find out about my music projects at oneworldmusic.com, O-N-E worldmusic.com. And they can find out about my organizational work, excuse me, at orchestratingexcellence.com. That's really about my keynotes, my organizational trainings, the virtual team building I do for remote teams, virtual teams, all of that stuff.
Run the three names by us one more time, please, Gary.
Sure. Roots and Wings Medicine Music is the name of the CD,
Right.
and that's available on all streaming platforms
Okay.
now. And Bandcamp, the nice thing about Bandcamp is I actually get to see some revenue if you buy it on Bandcamp. If it's the other streaming platforms, I'm saving up for my puppy's college education, so the streaming platforms don't really help much.
Okay.
The other websites are One World Music, that's ONE worldmusic.com for my recordings, compositions, concerts, stuff like that, handpan lessons, and then Orchestrating Excellence, which is to find out about my organizational work around leadership, team development, and creativity.
Well, thank you again, Gary Muszynski, for being with us today. I feel like you gave us a really strong appetizer, and we're going to have you back for some more of the main course.
That sounds lovely. I'd be honored.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you.